I've wanted to make a triangular hollow form for a long time. I ordered some large cube blanks from the sawmill, and they finally arrived. They mill cut a section of an oak log and delivered a long square timber, which now just needs to be cross-cut into individual cubes. To get a perfect triangular shape, I need a perfectly square cube. With a blank this size, that's no easy task. On the sliding table saw, I first square up the blank on all sides. Next, using a handsaw and a chisel, I clean up the wood fibers that the machine couldn't reach. Once one face is perfectly flat, all that's left is to dimension the blank to the final size of the future cube. So, now that I have a nearly perfect cube, I need to chamfer one of the corners slightly to make it easy to mount with the tailstock life center. Finally, I mount the cube onto the wood lathe. At low RPM, I carefully cut the tenon, making sure the blank doesn't fly off the lathe. Once the cube is securely gripped in the chuck, I can breathe a small sigh of relief and begin roughing out this heavy workpiece in slightly more comfortable conditions. The side of the cube ended up being nearly 37 centimeters, or almost 15 inches. At this size, the weight of this cube is around 40 kilograms. The last thing I want is for it to fly off the lathe while spinning. One of the blanks I'd started turning the day before shattered right during the process. An internal crack running between the two piths just couldn't hold up in the final stages of turning when the wall thickness was less than 1 centimeter. As usual, I wanted to achieve a thin and elegant form, but it came up just a little short of becoming a triangular bowl. Since that's how it turned out, I decided to go further with this cube and make something more complex. Now that the cube is mounted in the chuck, I cut a second tenon, which will serve as the primary one. It's worth noting that I had to constantly resharpen my tools. When turning at low speeds, using razor-sharp tools is absolutely essential. In this case, the speed was kept around 500 revolutions per minute. This particular log section had a double pith, and there was a little crack running through one of them. To avoid having to deal with it later, I decided to fix it right away by filling it with PVA glue and oak sanding dust. In this situation, it's the perfect solution. I should also mention that I prefer to sand the exterior before starting the hollowing process. While the walls are still thick, I can apply as much pressure as needed during sanding, which is definitely not something you can do once the walls become thin. Once I mount the blank into the main chuck, I begin preparing for the hollowing process. To do this, I clear away the waste wood and prep the area for the Forstner bit. Today, I've decided to make a sphere-shaped neck. This will be an interesting contrast to the triangular shape of the vessel itself. Using the Forstner bit, I drill a hole just over 14 inches deep. My plan is to turn a vessel with a wall thickness of 5 to 6 millimeters and a bottom thickness of less than 4 millimeters. Next, I set up the steady rest and the deep hollowing system. Today, they will be subjected to maximum loads and vibrations. Just like last time, I applied some masking tape, but for some reason, it didn't hold up long today and had to be peeled off quickly. No big deal. We'll manage without it. Just like before, I begin hollowing out the center. I'm using an 8 millimeters diameter cutter for this volume of wood. It's exactly what's needed. Since the wood was being cleared out so rapidly, I had to constantly stop and clean out the accumulating shavings. After about half an hour, I had removed the bulk of the waste wood and changed the cutter's angle of attack. Another half hour later, as I was getting very close to the target wall thickness, I started the finishing pass, slowly riding over every high spot on the surface. Even though the cutter was extended more than 40 centimeters beyond the tool rest, the boring bar transmitted every surface imperfection so precisely that I could clean up the uneven spots almost with my eyes closed. At one point, one of the wheels started blocking the camera's view, so I had to slide it slightly out of the way. With the hollowing finished, all that's left is to clean up the surface using a negative rake scraper. It does an excellent job and cleanly shears the interior of hollow forms. Usually, we don't sand the inside of hollow forms after using it, as the surface is left with minimal tear out and is ready for 120 grit sanding. Let's take a quick detour and make the finial for our vessel. I didn't have to overthink its design. The idea came to me naturally. I had a piece of an oak log end in my offcuts. On the sliding saw, I cut out an 8 centimeters cube. I don't have the time to make a Fritz and Franz jig right now, so I have to manage by using a clamp instead. Following the same process, I turn the small cube into a triangular finial, which is a perfect match for the piece. At this scale, of course, I can really crank up the speed, so I set the lathe to 1,700 revolutions per minute. I resharpen the blade and make a finishing pass. Once the finial is finished, I coat it with linseed oil. I apply the linseed oil to the vessel itself as well, coating only the exterior. The interior will remain unfinished. So, what do we have in the end? An oak hollow form, nearly 14 inches or 34 centimeters tall. Its diameter at the widest point is about 30 centimeters. Even though a massive amount of wood was hollowed out from the inside, it still retains a very significant weight.